Just this week, Bernie Sanders presented himself as the chief unity enforcer of the Democratic Party, degrading himself to such an extent that, as you see here in Politico, he attacked his longtime friend and vocal supporter in 2016 and 2020, Cornel West, who's running as a Green Party candidate. We had him on our show. We intend to do so again. You heard from him directly because Cornel West's crime is doing what Bernie Sanders claimed he wanted to do, which was to radically subvert the power of the Democratic Party establishment. And yet, instead of joining that cause, Bernie is now the chief defender of the Democratic Party, along with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. In many ways, they have become the most valuable instruments of the Democratic Party establishment. They once pretended to dedicate themselves to subverting and undermining because they lend what is left of their credibility as party dissidents to persuade others who followed them that somehow the way they can continue to serve what they perceive as this radical anti-establishment agenda is by remaining in servitude until the end of time to that very same Democratic Party establishment now represented by Joe Biden. So to talk about what this all means, and there's several other interesting components to this that I want to cover, we are delighted to have on our show. We've been trying to get her on our show for some time. She's a very busy woman, and it's difficult to do so. We're thrilled we were able to make it work. She's sabrinasalvati, who's the host of the Sabby podcast. She's also the co-host of the Revolutionary Blackout Network, which is familiar to our audience. We've had other hosts, including Nick Cruz, on our show many times. I believe Sabby was on our show in kind of the prelude rehearsal version of our show, but never actually on the show itself. So Sabby, we're so excited that we were able to make this work. Good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Glenn. Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. So I am very excited to talk to you about this new role that Bernie Sanders has. Or you know what, maybe it's not a new role. I don't actually think it's a new role. I just think it's a clearer role, which is as the attack dog for the very Democratic Party establishment that he long claimed to be devoted to subverting and undermining. And the way in which he did that this week was by being the leader of the attack, the increasingly ugly attacks on what was alleged to be his longtime friend, somebody who vocally supported him, who he's now turning around in the media and attacking, and that's Cornel West. What do you make of all that?
I think that what Bernie Sanders is doing to Cornel West is absolutely pathetic. I want people to understand what this is really about. Bernie Sanders is a tool of the Democratic Party. What they have done is they have taken someone who appeared to be outside the duopoly because he's a registered independent, and they have used Bernie Sanders to basically usher people into the Democratic Party, pretending to be an outsider, pretending to be anti-establishment, and rallying up a base of young people and working class people and getting those people energized about a political revolution that Bernie Sanders knew was never going to happen through the Democratic Party. I want to be very clear about that. And then in turn, what Bernie Sanders is to do when they do not allow him to win, and they won't allow him to win even in the future, is to take those supporters, that base, and to tell them to vote for the corporate establishment that he told them to fight back against. Now you see Bernie Sanders attacking Cornel West. Cornel West has the guts to do what Bernie Sanders did not have the guts to do. Bernie Sanders says that this is to protect democracy. But Bernie Sanders knows, even when it comes to his own presidential campaigns, there really wasn't a real democracy, at least when we not look through the Democratic Party, because of the super delegates. Bernie Sanders, till this day, doesn't really mention the DNC fraud lawsuit. He doesn't talk about the fact that DNC attorney Bruce Spiva argued that the DNC is a corporation. The judge ruled in that case that the DNC can select a candidate and does not owe you a fair election. But Bernie Sanders doesn't mention this. Bernie Sanders is doing a press tour telling everybody how we have to protect democracy. So you should not support Cornel West and you should support Joe Biden. Once again, he's telling you to support the corporate candidates that he told you to push back against and to fight against. So what people have to understand is that Bernie Sanders is a tool of the Democratic Party to make you think that you are going to get progress, but to water it down and to prevent you from having any strong outside grassroots movement that is going to change the system.
So let's remind ourselves that Bernie Sanders technically is not even a member of the Democratic Party. He is somebody who has long praised the third-party candidates who challenged the two-party system, saying that the two-party system is radically corrupted. The Democrats and the Republican establishments have far more in common than they do differences, that alternatives are crucial. And here you now have not just anybody as an independent candidate, but someone who's supposed to be his friend, someone who supported his campaign vocally in the last two presidential elections. So even if Bernie Sanders at the end of the day wants to end up supporting Joe Biden the way he did in 2016 and 2020, what does it say to you about Bernie Sanders' character that he's willing to take the lead in it? I don't think anyone other than AOC, who we'll get to in a minute, has directly criticized or attacked Cornel West until Bernie Sanders did it. A year and a half out before there's a single primary vote cast, what does it say to you about his character that he's doing this with such gusto?
It tells you that Bernie Sanders is just as corrupt as the corporate Democrats that he tells you to fight back against. He's really no different. I think that Bernie Sanders got marching orders from the DNC leadership. He follows DNC leadership, even though he's supposed to be an independent. And I'm pretty sure they told Bernie Sanders, get out there and get what's left of your base and get those people energized to come in and support Joe Biden so that we don't lose to Donald Trump. This is really how this works. When Democrat leadership tells them to do something, they do it. This is why the squad members don't really push back or fight back the way that they're supposed to. All of these people are destined or really want to keep their seats. That's more important to them. That's become more important to them. Book deals are more important to them. These speaking fees are more important to them than actually fighting for the people, which is what they ran on. I think that Bernie Sanders seriously owes working class people a public apology for taking their last $5, for taking their last $10. I watched people travel for hours to come to see Bernie Sanders speak here in Boston because they believed that he was going to fight for Medicare for all for them. And the way that he has treated these people, you don't even see Bernie Sanders on left independent media anymore, Glenn. He's doing a press tour. He won't go on to TYT. He's definitely not going to come on to my show.
He would never come on my show. He would never come on my show. Somebody who had supported me during the Snowden reporting, who supported me when Brazil tried to prosecute me, whose campaign I didn't explicitly support in 2016, but very obviously supported over Hillary Clinton. He would never come on this show or any other show that is in any way separated from the Democratic Party establishment, because as you said, Bernie Sanders is not separated from the Democratic Party establishment. And let me ask you something about the attacks in particular. I don't know how many people remember this because it happened a little bit quickly, and also people who are younger tend not to remember things from even before 5 years ago. But in 2007, the Clinton primary war against the Obama campaign was one of the ugliest things in politics I've ever seen. And as you probably recall, Barack Obama had acknowledged, I think much to his credit, that he had used drugs in college, like a majority of Americans did. George Bush also had admitted that when running in 2000, that he had experimented with cocaine, that he was an alcoholic. There was no indication Barack Obama had any problems with drugs. He experimented with them, as most people did, as I did in college, as almost everybody I know did. And then the Clinton campaign used surrogates in the most despicable way possible, claiming it would be Republicans who were going to do this. They said the problem now is Republicans are going to start saying, well, where did you get these drugs from? And how much did you have? And did you ever sell them? And then black leaders said, look, you can have this primary war, but you're not going to take the first viable Democratic Party nominee, I guess they didn't consider Jesse Jackson to be that, and turn him into a drug dealer. And that's the only reason that kind of went to an end, is black leaders in the party drew a line. I'm sure you've seen the attacks on Cornel West. For as long as I've been around, Cornel West has been talked about in reverent terms, even within the Democratic Party, despite his being a critic of it, as one of the leading black scholars and leading intellectuals in the United States, which he absolutely is, just objectively, if you look at the history of his books and scholarship and the influence it has had. And now, Sabby, overnight, they are trying to turn him into a deadbeat dad. They have this scumbag who himself doesn't really matter, except that he's clearly a paid influencer, this 20-year-old kid, Harry Sisson, who went on Twitter and said Cornel West, the Green Party candidate, owes close to $500,000 in unpaid taxes and child support. This is the guy that people on the far left are saying should take votes away from Biden. Seriously? Don't be fooled. He's not a serious candidate. Biden 2024. Later on, I believe he deleted the tweets. He was talking to some other paid influencer, and he was saying, let's remind everybody at every opportunity that Cornel West went around impregnating multiple women and abandoned his children, which is a total complete lie, but it plays into the worst tropes that the Democratic Party feels free to use. Honestly, it infuriates and disgusts me. What's your reaction to the way they're attacking Cornel West?
Well, we knew smears were going to come because he's running third party, but also even if he ran in the Democratic Party, they would smear him too because they already selected Joe Biden. That's how it works for the Democratic Party. But it just goes to show you that the Democratic Party, that liberals can also use racist tropes
Really?
against people.
Wait, so I think we're breaking some news here. What you're saying is that liberals, people who are adherents to the Democratic Party, are capable of either weaponizing racism or actually believing in racist views? Or is that what you're telling me?
100%, Glenn. Some of the same people who have, especially I see it here like in places like Massachusetts, right? So some of the same people who have a Black Lives Matter sign in their window don't want you living next door to them. They don't want me living next door to them. Some of the same people who say that they support that LGBTQ people should have their rights don't want it in their backyard. So there's a lot of this that happens, and I think that
or look at with immigration. For years, we heard that anybody who wanted to close the border, anybody who was complaining about the number of immigrants in their community, automatically was racist and white nationalist. And now there are a lot of immigrants who are being sent to or settling in blue cities in New York and Washington, and the leaders of those cities are demanding that the federal government stop that flow. They're very good about cheering for immigration when it's other communities that have to integrate them, and the minute it's their communities that need to, suddenly they're demanding that the wall be built.
That's right. When migrants were sent to Martha's Vineyard here in Massachusetts, all of a sudden, all the liberals who said, immigrants' lives matter, you're welcome here, said you can't stay here. Get them out.
We don't have space for you.
So they were sent to Cape Cod.
We don't have space for you.
Reality. But this is the reality, Glenn. And then this goes back to the class issue. And a lot of this, there's intersection here, but a lot of this goes back to the class issue, whereas you will find that some of the wealthy, more elite liberals, they will talk a good game. But when it comes to action, they will say some of these same talking points that they blame the Republicans for saying. So what is it really about? And that's what I think we have to ask when we look at what's happening with Cornel West, what's happening with Bernie Sanders, what's happening with what's left of the progressive base. I think at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, a lot of these people that were a part of the Bernie movement, were they really, amped up for radical change and some type of revolution and changing the system? Or were they mainly liberals, upper class liberals that just wanted health care?
Right, or who really enjoyed the media branding that made a lot of them very wealthy of pretending that they were some sort of space that a lot of white progressives wanting to be edgy, wanting to feel like they didn't have the same politics as their mom, who loved Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi, got to go and feel radical. Even at the end of the day, those people who were getting rich off this edgy branding were telling them to go and vote for Gavin Newsom, or going and telling them to go for Joe Biden, because they wanted to make sure that they maintained their access to those establishment circles.
That is correct. It's all about protecting the status quo. And that includes Bernie Sanders, too. He's still going to protect the status quo. So what Bernie Sanders actually did is he actually took his movement and now he's moving it further to the right. Whereas it was supposed to be the left, he's moving it further to the right just to get along with the status quo with the Democratic Party, because they're afraid that you'll get someone like Donald Trump again. If you look at what's happening with the economy, would that be so bad for a lot of people? The economy is a mess. So to sit there and to watch Bernie Sanders tell these deliberate lies about Joe Biden's economy, you know exactly what the game is. You know exactly what he's doing. Bernie Sanders probably has been the best political con artist of my generation. He scammed a lot of people, and he owes a lot of people their money back, people who gave them the last bit that they had because they believed in him. Now, you don't do that and walk away from that unless you're just corrupt as the others that you told people to fight against.
Yeah, and we should remember as well that during the campaign, Donald Trump was associating himself with Bernie Sanders on a lot of issues affecting the working class and the middle class, including opposing more of these trade deals that I don't know if you were on, but we showed Bernie Sanders in the debate attacking Hillary Clinton for signing and wiping out and deindustrializing the working class and the middle of the country, not caring at all about the working class, bailing out Wall Street with billions of dollars to save their big donors. There's a lot of stuff that Donald Trump was saying. And at the end of the day, whatever else you want to say about Donald Trump, and we all have our critiques of him, the fact of the matter is he is the first American president in decades not to involve the United States in a new war. That is a historical fact that cannot be denied. Now, Sabby, let me ask you, obviously what's going on here is there was this poll, I'm sure you saw it, where it was an Emerson polling poll that polled how people would vote in the national election in 2024 if it were Trump versus Biden. And Trump has a 2-point lead in that scenario, 46 to 44%. Let's put this on the screen if we can. But then when you add Cornel West into the equation, which presumably is what will happen when voters go to the voting booth in 2024, they will see not 2 names, but multiple names, including Cornel West. Trump's lead increases to 5 points. Trump 44, so he took away 2 points from Trump. Biden 39, so he took away 5 points from Biden. Cornel West 4%. That is part of what has frightened them. So the argument coming from a lot of these progressives, a lot of the Democratic Party, you know what the argument is, obviously. It's the one they used against Ralph Nader, the one they used against Jill Stein, is that every vote for Cornel West is a vote being stolen from the rightful owner of those votes, Joe Biden. And so the only possible outcome of a Cornel West candidacy would be to help the Republicans and Donald Trump. What's your response to that argument?
Number one, you have to earn votes. You don't just get them. This election is not owed to Joe Biden, especially when he hasn't done things for the working class people and prices have continued to increase. So we don't owe him our vote. That's the first problem. The second problem is when we look at these polls, we have to remember these are people that typically have landlines, correct? So like I'm never polled. I've never been included in any of these political polls. I would argue that 4% for Cornel West is probably higher than 4%. So that's something we got to think about. These are the people that will vote because regardless of party, they feel like it's still their due diligence to do so. It's their duty to vote, but they're not polling people like me. They're not polling millennials. They're not polling like Gen Z or even Gen X. We're left out of those polls. So I question, and that's why I say I think that 4% for Cornel West is actually higher than what it says right now. And that's considering if it got to the point where Cornel West got that 15% and he's on the debate stage, oh, well, then it goes up even more. And I think the Democratic Party is going to try to prevent that. But I feel like the way the Democratic establishment is attacking Cornel West, it's very extreme because I don't see the Republican Party attacking libertarian candidates this way. So it's really interesting. I think they realize that Cornel West is a threat to them, that he could garner some of the black vote. I just saw a recent poll also that 20% of African Americans are supporting Donald Trump this time around. So it's not just Cornel West. There are obviously factors a part of Biden's presidency that have not helped the lives of working class people in this country, and that includes black people as well. And people are showing that with these polls. I mean,
it just couldn't be clearer. Now, entitlement syndrome, like no matter how many times Jill Stein voters or Ralph Nader voters say, if they weren't running, we would not have voted for Al Gore or Hillary Clinton. They just don't believe it. They believe they own these votes. They believe they own black votes. They believe they own LGBT votes. They don't believe Joe Biden said on the Breakfast Club in 2020, if you aren't clear and determined to support me, you ain't black. And that is absolutely their attitude, as you know as well as anybody. Now, Nathan Robinson, who is one of those people who kind of branded himself as a Bernie Sanders supporter, though I will not in any way suggest that he did that cynically. I think that's genuine his view. He's like a good Democrat, but one that like believes that within this party that cheated right in their face are somehow going to reform them or whatever. But I think it's more naivete than cynicism in his case, but it doesn't really much matter to the point, which was he saw that poll and he said the following: if I were Joe Biden, I would be inviting Cornel West to the White House and asking him to submit the list of policies he would take in exchange for dropping out. Now, I want to just leave aside the hilarity of believing that Cornel West is so gullible, such a dupe, as if he's Bernie or AOC, that he thinks that if Joe Biden invited him to the White House and made a bunch of empty, unenforceable promises, that you could depend on those and then suddenly drop out. But I was also kind of wondering, let's play this kind of out, this thought experiment. I was thinking about Cornel West on my show and the critiques he was making about the Democratic Party. What would Joe Biden say to him? I'm going to fire Victoria Nuland and the neocons who are dominating the foreign policy of my administration. We're going to stop fueling the war in Ukraine. We're going to stop militarily encircling China and pursuing a Cold War. We are going to try and give Medicare for all instead of promising to veto it. I will now work to do everything possible to provide it. I'm going to pardon Julian Assange and Edward Snowden. We're going to provide transparency to the war machine in order to stop it. All the things that Cornel West is running on. What possibly could the Democratic Party or Joe Biden credibly offer to Cornel West, given his critique of this duopoly, in a way that would cause him to even think about dropping out of the race the way Nathan Robinson is fantasizing that he might?
There's nothing he would agree with in reference to what Cornel West is running on. That includes Medicare for all, too, by the way.
Yeah, I said that.
Big factor. Yeah, a big one for Bernie Sanders, who's really big on Medicare for all, but apparently not so much if he tells you to vote for Joe Biden and he knows Joe Biden isn't going to pass it and Joe Biden has already said so. I think these particular characters, the Nathan Robinson, right, the Tom Hartmans, the Jacobin crowd, the DSA crowd, I think that it is time that what is left of the progressive movement to move away from these people. They are going to hold us back. They will continue to tell the same message years from now, and we have gotten nowhere. When it comes to policy on the national level, none of these progressive policies have passed. They passed in the local areas, they passed in states, but that has been done by grass movements with the people on the ground. That's how we were able to pass some of those progressive policies in states like Massachusetts, California, even Nebraska passed $15 minimum wage. So it's not just a blue state issue. But when it comes to any type of progressive movement on the ground and push for policy, we are never going to get there if we continue to listen to the people that water down that message and continue to hold us back. Occupy Wall Street was a good idea. The problem is that movement was then funneled into a Bernie Sanders campaign. And we saw what happened. It was watered down compared to the message that the people had out on the street. So my message to people is, if you're going to have these movements, you have to have the movements on the outside. You cannot let these movements go through the Democratic Party or any political two-party system party, and you have to mobilize the people. You cannot just leave the people abandoned because you lost your campaign, so now there's no more movement. Glenn, we had the numbers to really make some type of a difference in this country. Hundreds of thousands of people showed up for Bernie Sanders. Imagine what we could have done with those numbers, but when the leader walks away from the movement after the campaign dies, that was the end of the movement.
Yeah, I mean, it was very similar to what happened with Barack Obama. He really assembled millions of young people who genuinely believed in what he said he intended to do, which was go to Washington and radically change the way it works and for whom it works. And then when he got there, he ignored that army behind him, served the DC establishment, centers of power in the most reliable and loyal way possible. He extended the war on terror he vowed to dismantle. And all of those people obviously got extremely disillusioned. And there are millions of people who don't even bother to vote because they've seen this play out over and over. And the idea that the Democratic Party, dependent since the Clinton administration on funding from the military industrial complex and from large corporate donors, the same people funding the establishment wing of the Republican Party, can possibly be reformed is a delusion and a lie that they're telling themselves because they don't have the courage to actually do what their alleged beliefs would lead them to do. Now, let me ask you, I want to get to AOC, the other extremely radical revolutionary leader that we're lucky enough to have in the United States and what she's doing as well. But before I do, I want to just go back to this because maybe you've already answered it and I'm asking you to repeat yourself. And if I am, just tell me that. But the thing that amazes me is it isn't just that there's an independent Green Party candidate who is extremely well known, extremely likable, someone I think could easily excite young voters in a way that Joe Biden doesn't have the slightest chance of doing, which is Cornel West. But if you're looking at it from Bernie Sanders' perspective, even if you want to remain enslaved to the Democratic Party, even though you spent your life claiming that you're not a part of it and getting people to support you on that basis, Biden does actually have primary challengers, RFK Jr., who I think is extremely problematic for lots of reasons that we don't need to get into. But then there's Marianne Williamson, who's sort of like a kind of modeling herself after Bernie, sort of running to the polite left of the Democratic Party. So even if you're AOC and Bernie Sanders and are saying, I think we need to stay within the Democratic Party, why not just pretend at least, like as a gesture, a crumb to throw, to say, well, we're going to support Marianne Williamson for now, just to show that we're still devoted. Like they've given up on the pretense even.
The same reason why they didn't endorse Nina Turner, because Democrat leadership told them, don't you do it. Don't you endorse Nina Turner. We're already going with Shontel Brown. Same reason why I think AOC was the only one that did, and she did it at the last minute the night before she got the pass or the approval, so to speak. So one of them could be the one. But that's why Democrat leadership has already spoken to people like Bernie Sanders and squad members like AOC. Don't you even dare think about doing it, or you will not keep your seat. This is why people who were vocal during that point in time when they were in office, like Dennis Kucinich and Cynthia McKinney, this is why they're not there, because they pushed back against Democrat leadership, and Democrat leadership made it so that Dennis Kucinich no longer even had a district. They redrew his district so he didn't have one, and that's how they got him out of office.
Because he used to attack the Democratic Party from the populist left, from the working class, class-based politics that they hate more than anything. And I think you're exactly right. The official position of the Democratic Party is announced by Simone Sanders on Morning Joe. Joe Scarborough is where they go to announce their official proclamations, is there is no primary debate within the Democratic Party. We're not going to ask Joe Biden to take a few days away from his napping to debate Marianne Williamson and RFK Jr. We're not going to put him up. We don't recognize a debate. Joe Biden is our nominee. They're proclaiming that before there's a single vote cast. And it doesn't seem to bother Bernie Sanders in the slightest, even though that's what they did to him. Nor does it seem to bother the other person that we were presented with as proof that the Democratic Party has all this vibrant debate going on within it. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was actually, I think, the first member of Congress to announce her support for Joe Biden. And she did it so notably on one of the most popular podcasts for hardcore loyalists of the Democratic Party establishment, which is that Pod Save thing that is hosted by a bunch of Obama boys. So we have the video, right, of AOC announcing her endorsement of Joe Biden on the. All right, I'm sure you've heard this before, Sabby, but I want to work you up a little bit, even if you have. But I also want to make sure that our audience who hasn't seen it sees it. This is AOC in July saying no, she's not interested in Marianne Williamson. She's not interested in Cornel West. She's not interested in anybody other than Joe Biden. She didn't extract a single concession. She didn't apparently ask for anything in return. She just became right out of the gate as early as possible on this program, not on my program or yours or anybody else's who she turned to for support when she needed it back in 2018. This is where she goes, and this is what she said.
The president's only primary opponents are Marianne Williamson, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Haven't been any rumors about anyone else even thinking about jumping in. Will you be supporting Joe Biden for re-election?
I believe given that field, yes. I think he's done quite well, given the limitations that...
Sabby, just so you make sure you heard that, she thinks he's done quite well, given the limitations. Let's listen to the rest.
I do think that there are ebbs and flows, as there are in any presidency. You know, there are areas that I think were quite strong when he came right out of the gate with the American Rescue Plan. And of course, the Inflation Reduction Act was a massive step in terms of our climate agenda. But, you know, there are also areas that I think could have gone better. We have major structural issues in this country, and I think it starts with the United States Senate. And I think that until we have senators that are willing to stand up and stare the filibuster in the eye and stare a lot of structural issues about the Senate, and the United States Senate will be what holds back this country from an enormous amount of progress.
So, Sabby, as I understand what she's saying, Joe Biden, who spent his life building the prison state and the drug war in the United States, who supported various aspects of Jim Crow, who was probably the most important Democratic senator, even more important than Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, in getting half of the Democratic Senate caucus and a big part of the Democratic Party to support the invasion of Iraq by supporting it when he was the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, who has devoted his entire life to serving the corporations in Delaware to make it more difficult for consumers in debt to get out of their debt through bankruptcy, remain in servitude to credit card companies, suddenly has had a gigantic ideological transformation at the remarkable age of 76. He got to that Oval Office, and he suddenly became basically a carbon copy of AOC and Bernie Sanders, so there's no reason to have to challenge anything Joe Biden is doing, except that we have to eliminate the constraints that are preventing Joe Biden from doing what he really wants to do, which is a complete reversal of everything he's spent his whole life doing to be able to finally serve the working class. Do you find that to be a credible way of understanding politics in Washington?
Not at all. I think AOC is just, she's acting, right? So this is what she was told to say. I don't even think she wrote those points down herself. She was already told by Democrat leadership, you better go out there and cheer on Joe Biden. Even when he's done something bad, you better go out there and talk him up. We need for you to do that, or we'll try to find someone to primary against you and get you out of here, right? And then it's embarrassing for her to be this so-called progressive who got in, and then you're basically pushed out, so to speak. I honestly do feel like AOC knew exactly what she was doing when she went onto that podcast. That podcast in particular, by the way, heavily smeared Bernie Sanders' campaign, which AOC technically was a part of at least the second time around and endorsed him instead of Joe Biden. So for her, she'll go into Pod Save America because she knows she's not going to get pushback. She's not going to be criticized. None of these people, where are they when it comes to left independent media, the same left media that promoted their campaigns, that talked them up, that told people to canvass for them and donate to them? You don't see them come onto these left platforms because they know they've been such a disappointment to what's left of the progressive community, and they don't want to take any type of criticism from the people who actually did help them get elected and get into office. She knows Joe Biden hasn't done a good job. She knows people, her part of her district is in the Bronx. She knows people are struggling still financially, are struggling to pay for groceries that continue to increase every week. AOC knows this, but AOC is there to play her part to make young people believe that you can have a chance just like me, and you just got to keep supporting the Democrats, and we are making gains. But that's not what's happening. But she's acting at this point.
Let me ask you this, just to kind of wrap up our interview. I could talk to you all night, and I'm going to keep harassing you to come back on the show, but just in consideration of your time, I'm going to try and wrap it up, and I'm going to do a two-part question, so feel free to kind of pick the parts you want. But first of all, I was in Milwaukee last week for the Republican presidential debate. I would love to attend a Democratic primary presidential debate. Unfortunately, there won't be one. But one of the things that was so notable was that there was this incredibly rabid dispute about crucial issues. So, you had candidates like Vivek Ramaswamy saying, I don't want another cent going to the war in Ukraine. And a lot of people cheered and a lot of people booed. And then you had Nikki Haley and Mike Pence saying, no, we need to continue to spend all of our money and fuel this war forever, the goal of which is not to help Ukraine win, but to keep it going forever, to enrich the arms industry, to destroy Russia. So you've had these really rapid disputes. And when you turn on Fox News, you can see one host who supports the war in Ukraine, another who opposes it, some who believe in traditional Republican economics from the Reagan era, others who support a more working class oriented politics. They have these real vibrant debates genuinely on the American right within the Republican Party. If you turn on the Democratic Party news outlets, CNN, the New York Times op-ed page, the Washington Post, MSNBC, Pod Save America, you don't hear a single peep of debate. Every single Democrat in the Congress, squad members like Ilhan Omar, who know better, Every last one of them voted for that $40 billion authorization for the war in Ukraine and will call you a Russian agent if you dare to question what they're doing, what was done to Bernie Sanders previously. There's just no debate. Everything is in lockstep. And then just as one example, I just wanted to share this with you because it really, I don't know if you saw AOC's interview with the New York Times today. There's been those political articles like praising AOC, like welcome, you're now part of the inside. You're an insider, congratulations. And that was the kind of ethos of the New York Times article today. And the reporter, though, pressed her and said, under Donald Trump, you made this extremely flamboyant and theatrical visit to the border. She dressed up in white. She posed for those very distraught and anguished shots. Nothing at the border has changed, except that in some ways it's gotten worse. And they said to her, it's been 2.5 years since Joe Biden was inaugurated. Why have you not gone to the border? Like, where did your interest in the border go that was so expressive and so emotive? And she first tried to say, I'm tending to the problems in our backyard. We have a lot of migrants in New York. I'm tending to them. And they said, I know, but you said that the abuses at the border, which haven't stopped, were like Nazi-like. Where did your interest go in them? So it's kind of a two-part question. Do you look at the American right and see this kind of debate, this war that they're waging against the establishment, for better or for worse? And then secondly, the fact that AOC is so flagrant in the insincerity of her beliefs, and yet there's still a lot of people who still believe in her. What do you make of that whole mess?
I think it's easy to appear to be left when the president in the White House at the time is a Republican, right? So we did see a lot more gusto from people like AOC and the squad when Trump was in office. But the moment that Joe Biden won, that changed. To your point about the border, that did change. She hasn't been back down there. Kids are still in cages, and I don't see her crying now, the fake tears that she even had during that time in those pictures. So I think that's the difference. They have the approval and the okay when Trump's in office because the goal was to get Donald Trump out. But the moment that position is replaced by someone who's a member of their own party, now they have to toe the Democrat line. They can't push back in that way or they'll be removed from their seats. Now, in reference to the Republican Party, it does seem like to me that there are more people, more so those that are part of the Freedom Caucus, that are willing to push back on establishment voices in the Republican Party. They'll push back on like a Kevin McCarthy. We saw that whole ordeal that happened with the speakership. That's what the squad was supposed to do. So I think it comes down to, it seems like to me, the politicians that are in the Democratic Party in DC are not listening to their constituents. And they're not listening to their constituents because they know that their constituents will continue to support them regardless because they're not likely to be challenged. AOC doesn't have a challenger. Ilhan Omar, these people don't have primary challengers. That could change, right? Whereas with the Republican Party, it seems like to me, the pushback that came from people like a Lauren Boebert or a Matt Gaetz and a Marjorie Taylor Greene before she changed her mind, it seemed like to me, they are doing what their constituents want them to do. So I think this goes back to the point of political parties. When I think back to the founding fathers, one of the things that the founding fathers did not want for this country was political parties. And this is the reason why, because people would look beyond policy in some circumstances and they would side with the party that they're a part of because it's their party. So I hear people bring this up a lot of times about what the founding fathers want for this country, but they don't bring up that point, that they didn't want political parties in this country. And sometimes I wonder, what would it be like if we did not have political parties?
It's a great point. They were very worried about how human beings break up into factions and how they give up on common values. And so often it just is true that people in the working class in the United States who are successfully split and divided and taught to hate each other have so much more in common in terms of their common enemies and their common interests, and yet they remain split. And political parties, these two in particular, are a crucial way that's done. Just by the way, the Political article from April heralding AOC was entitled "From Agitator to Insider, the Evolution of AOC." And it was all about how she's now learned to become a cooperative member of the Democratic Party, which I think is absolutely true. Sabby, let people know, please, where they can find your genuinely outstanding work. I watch you all the time. I watch your network all the time. So please let people know how they can find your work.
Sure thing. You can find me on YouTube. My channel is Sabby Sabs. You can also find me on the Revolutionary Blackout Network. We're also on YouTube, and we're also on Rumble.
So, yeah, exactly. You guys are on Rumble. I was super excited when you joined. And if you want somebody whose views you may not always agree with, although sometimes or often you probably will, I think, but someone who is, well, you just saw her. You don't need me to explain to you. They're just very, not only honest and beholden to nobody, but it's also commentary based in a lot of work, a lot of information and knowledge. I think that's the thing I appreciate most about it. It's never polemical or just ranting. It's a very well-formed and well-developed argument, and that's what I appreciate most. Sabby, thrilled to have you on the show. We've been trying for a long time, as you know. Let's not make it another 7 months until the next appearance. I hope to have you back soon.
Thank you so much, Glenn.
Have a great night.